Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts Jesse Metters and Ramin Lamay, where we discuss the latest cutting-edge technologies and how they are affecting the security industry. Join us as we explore the latest advancements and discuss how these innovations are shaping the future of security. With Jesse, a skilled recruiter, and Ramin, a seasoned security leader, this is the show where industry expertise meets in-depth discussions.
Welcome back, everyone. We are real excited for this episode. This is a different direction than we've gone here at Securing the Future, and we are going to really dive into cyber insurance. Are they an ally or an adversary? And I know many of you security leaders have your different, very strong opinions typically in this area. So we were able to bring on Nathan Thomas today, who is an underwriter for AXA Insurance. And we're going to have him tell a little bit of his background, his story. But first, I want to, of course, let everyone say hi to Ramin, my co-host.
What's up, guys?
And we're excited to dive into this topic. I think this is going to be very helpful for the community that we serve to really get an understanding kind of the inner workings of behind the scenes with someone who is insuring these policies every day, but actually has some real expertise in the area. So first of all, welcome, Nathan, to our podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Expertise is a strong word, so I'll see if I can live up to that. But yeah, it's great to come on here and speak with you guys. I've listened to some of your episodes before, and I think that you got like a lot of good content, a lot of things happening here. So excited to talk cyber insurance to the team. And as far as my background, I have an interesting background where I started actually working in IT in 2007, and then in 2009 I joined a company called RLI, which is an insurance company. And I was an IT support guy for them, worked in IT, worked through security out in RLI. And in 2019, I moved over into underwriting in cyber. So what was nice is because the person who set up the cyber liability practice at that point, he actually used to be like the CISO or IT director of security for that company as well. And so he also came out of auditing. So he had all of his ducks in a row. So really kind of examining security posturings and understanding what we were talking about. He wanted to have his motto was certified and excellent or something like that. Certified and excellent. Are your underwriters cyber certified was like the tagline. So he and I both had our CASSPs, and then our other ones on the team were more like they had RPLUs and CPCUs. And so we were all really tried to be educated on to know what we were talking about and what we were doing. So that I have my CASSP, I joined the underwriting team, and then I started accruing some other designations like the RPLU, which is the Registered Professional Liability Underwriting Society. They do that. And then I did the CPCU from the institutes and some other letters after my name. They're there too. But trying just to learn as I can, because like if you stop learning, what are you doing, right? You need to always continue to be learning, always make the effort to kind of put things together. But that's where I made the change into underwriting in 2019, and then I have been at RLI, Crum and Forrester, and now I'm at AXA XL, which I should say, just legalese and everything, my opinions and expressions are my own views, not that of my employer. So this is just Nathan's thoughts here.
Yeah, we always want to make sure we cover that for sure. Go ahead, Ramin.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on, Nathan. Thank you for joining us. And it's interesting as you talk about your background, I don't think this is something I've thought about. You're an auditor, right? You have a risk background, so you've been on the other side. You know how to run programs, you know how to support programs, so now you're into assessing programs. This is essentially your role, right?
Yeah, I kind of joke sometimes that one of my favorite things about being an underwriter as opposed to being from when I was in IT was not having to get those calls at 3 a.m. about our system having an issue and having to fix it. So now I can examine and see the issues, make my assessment, but I don't have to fix it. But it's kind of one of the nice things about being on the underwriting side now.
Oh,
yep,
absolutely.
It's the same for consultants.
Totally. Yeah, you mentioned you have a family now too, so you don't want to be getting woken up at 3 a.m. and then have to deal with the kids in the morning and all that stuff, right? It gets really stressful, I'm sure.
Now, our claims team, they do wake up at 3 a.m. because if there is an issue, they get the calls, right? So that is at least one side of it. But on underwriting, at least that's a perk.
Yeah. Well, maybe as a starting point, Nathan, for those who maybe haven't had to get cyber insurance for their company or haven't been through this process, maybe you've gotten insurance, obviously, in other ways in your life. Walk us through a little bit of the life cycle. Like, what does this process look like? And maybe your perspective on the size clients that you normally work with. Obviously, we don't need any specifics, but just to kind of getting a sense of what the life cycle looks like when you're working with a customer, and then we can dive into some specific topics. I know Ramin had a lot of good questions he wanted to ask you as well.
Yeah, sure. So when someone wants to procure cyber insurance, they typically will need to go through some sort of a broker. So like it could be an Amwins or a Marsh or an Aon or Willis. Name your broker that you want to work with. They can provide cyber insurance because then they can present it to the carrier market. And to do that, they'll have to fill out some sort of application or attestation of what their cybersecurity posturing is, just to give us something to base it off of, right? Now, it depends on the complexity of the organization. It could be, if it's a technology provider, we're a little bit more scrutiny because not only do we do cyber, but we also do technology errors and omissions, which could be bad updates or program errors that cause decisions to be made incorrectly in the future. Those things all come in together too. And what's funny is, like with cyber, you think about the history of it, it kind of grew out of data privacy insurance, and it's kind of coming back around to that data privacy aspect now too. So if you hold records of people, like you think about CCPA, the California Citizen Protection Act, I think it is, or GDPR, where these are data regulations, there could be fees or fines that if their data is not held correctly or responsibly according to those regulations, that they can need insurance for that too to help cover those penalties where applicable by law. Like there are some fees that are meant to be disciplinary and can't be covered by insurance, but for the most part, all of them can be. Or if you have to contact all these people and let them know, hey, your data was lost, by the way, and here's some coverage for theft monitoring, identity monitoring for 3 years or something like that, that could all be covered by your cyber insurance policy. But that's where it began. So it began with data, but then you saw like the rise of ransomware and you saw the rise of all these other things that can impact different companies too. Think about a manufacturer. If they're trying to protect themselves from a dependent business interruption loss, they could have let's say it's someone who makes ice cream. So just think about if you have a manufacturer for ice cream or something like that, and so they manufacture all this ice cream, they're getting their milk from the dairy provider, they're getting the other things coming in, but then all of a sudden they're hit with a ransomware attack that shuts down their systems, and they got all this downstream stuff coming in that's not able to be processed anymore, so it creates a backlog, so they have to stop all that, and then they can't ship their stuff out, so then they're at a loss because of the manufacturing delay. So like a dependent business or someone that would be affected downstream from them too could be impacted. So like let's say the retailers, now they can't get this product because of this thing. There could be a claim that's made somewhere along the way too. So there's all kinds of factors that kind of come through with the types of industries that you're dealing with and the types of clientele or revenue that they have and their contractual needs. And it's no one-size-fits-all policy. Like you could, depending on your needs, you may only need like $1 million of coverage if you're a smaller company. But if you are a multi-billion-dollar or trillion-dollar company, you could need 100 million or more of coverage and build like a tower of insurance. So it really just depends on the assessed needs of the client, and the brokers will help them figure out, okay, what do I actually have to cover here? And then the brokers will come over here, give us the information that they filled out, and then we'll make an assessment. Sometimes we may need to have a little bit more information and dive back and forth with some questions, kind of digging into, okay, you said you got some backups, but you didn't really give me a lot of detail. Are they immutable? Are they in more than one location? Or do you have like a warm site or a hot site ready? What's your recovery process look like? So there could be some back and forth, or there could be, one of my favorite things, an underwriting call where we can actually speak with like a CISO or the directors of IT and the risk managers to really understand the security culture of the company and really make an assessment that way, because the more complex the insured or the entity is, the more rigor you need to take around it, right? So that's kind of like in a nutshell what the process would look like. They would go to an insurance broker, get some information from them, they send that information out to carriers, we assess it, and if it's something we can write, we'll offer them a quote.
Nathan, a question there, and I appreciate that detailed explanation, right? I feel like that was not technical, easy to follow. Is there typically like a standard you guys have for the type of revenue or type of company and like the amount of cyber insurance they should consider? Because I've seen that kind of all over the place. And when it's left to the brokers, right, I don't know if I always trust the brokers, right, from a third party perspective, right? I don't know if they're trying to always up. But yeah, I'd love to understand from your point of view, outside of obviously everyone trying to make the most money on a transaction, what is it that you guys typically recommend people to have coverage, in terms of whether it's revenue or how to think about it?
So there's a couple different factors there, and it may not just be revenue based. So it could be the number of records that they have too, because like you have to think about if they have 10 million records, then that's 10 million people that would have to be noticed, and the average notification costs and things like that. You see, you take those things all into consideration, and if you are trying to kind of recommend the right amount of insurance, I mean, you could think that they need like $1 million, or they may think that they need $5 million, just depending on what their risk management or assessment is. But a lot of times, you kind of see there's like a range. When you're about $100 million, that's kind of like the area where it's probably about $5 million of coverage is kind of where you should be. And then depending on more complexities or more coverages, or if you have professional liability in there as well, then that could be more, just depending on what that policy looks like, because they can be tailored to really encompass a number of things. Because you think about it, it's data privacy, it's extortion, ransomware, it's media coverage a lot of times as well, which covers advertising activities and things like that. And it could also be payment card issues, if you need PCI coverage, things like that. All those things kind of come together in a cyber policy, even though it's just called cyber.
Right. And then in terms of, you've worked at 3 different companies in the, I would say, recent past, right, the last 5-6 years. Have you seen any kind of standardization in terms of the different types of insurance they provide, the different underwriting process, how you guys assess them, and then how the coverage and all that works? Because from what I've seen from an outside point of view, it doesn't look like it's at all standardized, right? Each provider, each broker I've ever worked with, completely a different experience.
Yeah, every carrier has their own application form, and there is no standardization of questions. Sometimes they'll be very similar, right? They're trying to ask about backups or security programs, protocols, training, things like that. So they'll be similar along a lot of times, but some may dive deeper. So I know like there's some carriers or some brokers out there that their assessment or their application could be 100 pages long. It could be very detailed information that back in 2019, there weren't a lot of people diving too far into the technology, into the controls and everything else. That's one thing that we kind of brought a different vision to, is like, hey, we're out of IT, right? We understand like this is how you secure data. This is the best way to do this. And so we would ask those types of questions back then. Not a lot of underwriters were doing that at that point. A lot of them came out of like an E&O space or a D&O space, or fresh out of college, just trying to understand things and grow with the product. But over the past few years, let's say since like 2021, there has been a shift where there are more underwriters and different carriers that are really interested in learning about the IT side. There's a lot of people in my organization and in others that I've worked with too that are actually pursuing like the certified in cybersecurity from ISC2, just to kind of help them understand the domains of cyber coverage or cyber practicing and what they should be looking for. They want to learn. So underwriting has evolved and changed, because I think now we're to a point where underwriters actually have some knowledge of what they're actually looking at these days, right? It's not just checking off boxes. It's kind of looking between those lines and be like, okay, I see that you're saying that you're using an EDR product, but what is the EDR product? What's that configuration look like? And how do we make sure that this is a quality product that we've got some positive experience with? Because not all EDRs are created equal. Some function poorly and some are pretty good. And it also depends which level you're looking at, right? And if you think about too, like they could say, like, oh, yeah, we got Office 365. Okay, great. Which e-license? What are you using for that? What's your ATP? Are you using the new EDR Defender from them? That kind of thing. Like just understanding those more questions, because people actually on the underwriting side in the community have that knowledge now. That has been, when we first started underwriting in cyber, it was basic. Do you have a computer? Yes or no? Right? So you kind of move away from that, and now we're actually able to dive into a lot of these different things that would impact a policy.
How much on your end do you guys rely on, whether it's manual, like what you're looking at in terms of assessment, versus like technology like AI to help you kind of go through data and give you its synopsis. I'm curious, technology evolving on that side as well for your use cases?
Technology is always evolving and always trying to look at to help us to understand and better assess a risk. But I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. I like to look at things and I like to dive into things. Like we can also use monitoring tools, right? Name your monitoring scanning tool out there that scans people. We have access to those tools too, and in my opinion, they're a signal. That's about all they are. They are not the end all, they are not the be all. But there are some carriers that is the end all and that is the be all. That report will say whether or not they can have insurance. I don't think that's right, because those can be wrong, those can be bad scans, and really you need to understand, again, the culture of security that they have. And you can't get that from a scan or a report. But for thinking about these application processes, it would be nice with the sheer volume that we see to get something in here. But at the same time, I think it's the due diligence really falls on us to really dive in and review these things manually, especially at the time if it's a complex risk. Like if it's something that's pretty cut and dry, like it's Jesse's corner store and he needs to make sure he's got some insurance, that we could probably run that through. But if it's something that's more, it's a manufacturer and they're manufacturing pharmaceuticals, right? That's something that I think I need my hands on and I can actually understand.
Or that judgment, right? Technology can knock out tasks and you can automate tasks, but it can't help you with judgment always.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think when we started this episode, the thought was ally versus adversary. And I think when you're an ally to someone, you actually care enough to ask the right questions and enough about what that person's going through to ask the proper questions, right? Like we've learned so much of that in consulting, Ramin and I, and a lot of it is about, first of all, your domain knowledge of the customer and what their environment normally looks like, but also how to ask the right questions so that you're actually on their side. Like, hey, look, I'm here to help you get the right coverage so that we can protect you. We don't want to have a claim, right? So like it's beneficial on both sides. How are you approaching them? It sounds like that's how you approach things, but from what I've heard, and I think Ramin's already mentioned it, not every insurance company does it that way. So how do you feel that you guys are being more of an ally to your customers than like, oh God, I got to work with the underwriter now, and they're not going to care about my environment. They're not going to really understand me, right? Like walk me through that a little bit. I think you've mentioned something so far.
So one of the nice things that we can do is we have access to our claims people that handle all the stuff that comes through here. And what we could do is set up a meeting with the insured to understand why these controls are important with our claims people that have seen the things right and have the reasons behind it. And that can say like, hey, it would be important for you guys to think about implementing, let's just say phishing training, because we've seen an uptick in phishing and the AI is now making emails that are even more hard to discern from. And so a simple phishing attempt could lead you into clicking on something, and our claims people have seen a lot of that stuff, and so we can bring them into a meeting with like the risk manager or the CFO or things like that, and that could help actually someone who's been trying to implement some sort of process to protect the organization better. You can help them really make that case to that person who may control the funding behind it. Be like, oh, well, I guess that would make us a more secure organization. Sometimes it helps just to have an outside set of eyes that come in that validates the concerns that an IT director or a CISO has already brought up. So basically, they're in their corner to help them to have better controls, to help them implement something that they may have been working to try to get.
Out of curiosity, if you're looking at an organization that you might say is on the risky side, do you guys typically say, no, you're not insurable? Or do you give them like a roadmap of things that they need to improve and then you can revisit? I'm curious to see, like, what is it that you guys do if you do identify risk?
So it could be that there are some that I would say are quote-unquote uninsurable, but that would be ones who don't really invest in cybersecurity and want to use cyber insurance as their security policy or as their security plan. Those are ones that are just claims waiting to happen, that they have no interest in really investing in their cybersecurity. They just want to like, oh, we'll buy a policy for that. So companies and organizations that take that approach, I mean, there's definitely needs to be some hygiene correction there, in my opinion, for them to be insurable by me, in my opinion. Again, there could be another carrier that's like, yeah, sure, you pay us X amount of dollars and we'll give you some coverage. But if I look at an application or I have a discussion, like these are the issues that I'm seeing, and if we can have you guys improve on some of these fields, that's where we could actually come into play and offer you something. But a lot of companies, again, it's all different. Every underwriter has their own perspective. And like you said, there's no standardization at this point. But I think that's, in my opinion, that's the approach that I would always take.
Do you find that companies need to, this is one thing that I've been curious about, are they required in many cases to have a actual validation of controls, like a penetration test or something like that's necessary before they can get insured, or is that not as common?
So a lot of the companies that I see, they already are performing these things because a lot of them build their program using like the NIST framework or something like that. So they try to do the NIST best practices or CMMC or DFARS or something like that. They could be involved with those that already require these things. There are some that don't yet perform them, and so we definitely point out the reasons behind you wanting to perform pen tests and really identifying those exposures so that they can correct them before it's an actual big issue. But yeah, like you said, penetration testing, you could qualify for coverage if you don't have it, but it's something that I would like, hey, I mean, is it possible for you guys to start considering this or adding this into your roadmap over the next year or so, just to see if we can help them to understand the reason for a penetration test? Now, I will caveat that by saying, if it's a company that is secure or mature enough to have like a red team or purple teaming, I mean, they kind of have that in-house, but most likely a company of like that would already have pen testing performed anyway.
Right. One area that I've really learned more about cyber insurance in the last year while I've been consulting is the different types of coverage, right? As you said, it's not universal and the language is different for each provider, right? And then their coverage of what they cover in each of those items could be very different. And then exclusions, right? So a lot of times I do get contracted to look at cyber insurance in terms of what someone is looking to add or to see if the coverage they have meets the risk of where they are in terms of a security program and make sure the two are kind of balanced out. I'd love for you to kind of explain to us that balance of what's covered and then exclusions, because I don't think that was very well-known knowledge for myself, even while I worked on the corporate side, right? And making sure that I understood exactly what this language meant compared now to the consulting side where I'm now paid to essentially make sure that the coverage they have matches their risk in terms of like the programs that they have in place.
So I'll use an example. There's been recently, and this isn't cybersecurity necessarily per se related, this is more that data privacy piece again, is about a year ago or so, there was pixel tracking, Google Analytics and things like that were collecting data unknowingly of people's, and that gave rise to all these cookies and everything, like cookie disclaimers and all these notices come around. And if you were collecting data on a person and didn't inform them, that would be classified as like a wrongful collection. Well, some policies in their built-in definitions of exclusions will have wrongful collection kind of listed out there where it could be collecting those things. So there could be base policy language that says this is excluded, but you could always try to see if there's a way to get that endorsed to have a coverage of that. It may not be the full limit that you have open. It could just be like a sublimit of that. But if you can provide the information to an underwriter, they can understand like what you're doing with that, what the marketing team is doing with it, how that data is kept, how that data is stored, and how it's disposed of, actually. Like, do you have a disposal plan of that data? Because that limits your risk. So when you look at something like that, understand the definitions, and again, every policy is different. Everybody will have different exclusions, everybody will have different endorsements that they can use, but across the board, the coverage will most likely be, just kind of in those definitions. So make sure you look at all those definitions as you go through. And like Excel's definitions are different from Crum and Forrester's definitions, were different from RLI's definitions. Again, there's no standardization. That's the world of liability insurance in general. There's no standardizations. You could have standardizations in property and casualty and things like that, but we're in the Wild West over here.
Bring up a good point with those different use cases, and I feel like that's a good practice to have. A lot of times I will talk to, for example, the security lead or the technology leader of a company as I ask about their cyber insurance to get a sense of their scope and coverage. And they're like, I've never seen it. I don't know. That's legal's problem, all right? So, when you have that disconnect, right, then it makes me wonder, how did they know what use cases to cover? And do they have the proper coverage for those? Because, like your example, marketing could be collecting certain data, and legal is deciding just based on company revenue and company risk profile what to sign up for coverage. You have a disconnect there, right?
Mhm.
So do you generally work with like a legal type of resource on your end, or do you work with technologists and security folks as well?
So when you say on your end, do you mean like the carrier in general, looking at claims and underwriting, or are you just thinking more like the
Yeah.
underwriting side?
On the underwriting side, right? Do you see typically that connection between like their legal departments and the subject matter experts?
We definitely do. So we have subject matter experts in privacy or anything like that, and actually we do have legal support as well because all of our claims handlers at AXA are all lawyers. So we have a lot of knowledge there that we can lean on, that we can tap on each other on. So we do have insight into those processes and seeing how they handle that. Again, we do have subject matter experts. We do have outside like threat intel type providers that will give us information, or that we can ask, okay, if this is a current event, right? Like let's say it was like a log4j or move it or something like that. We would like give us the details, help us to understand this better, because we do have like those day-to-day practitioners that could be like from an IR firm or something like that, that we do have contracted as well to help us to understand things fully. So like I may, from a technical side, have a little bit more understanding of it, but there's still some things that are like new and coming. Like I didn't see that coming, right? So we're all relying on another set of eyes because nobody has all the answers. So helping us to really understand and get the full picture of the landscape, we do have a number of resources that we can tap into. So without naming any names, I'll keep this pretty benign. We have a number of losses that we see and take care of and handle every year. A lot of them have been lately due to the ransomware, like the lockbits and things like that, right? That really have been affecting people. And before, let's say 2021, there was a big issue with people not really having adequate backups, not having redundant backups, not having immutable backups. And basically their resiliency was nil. So we've seen a number of claims come through that have been due to that they weren't able to recover their data, they weren't able to get back up and running within a timely fashion, or like it could be a month or so, and they're still down because they have to rebuild all their systems from scratch. So you have the issue there where people are just don't have the appropriate backups and things in place, and then we help educate people on the reasons why you need to use this, why you need to have like a 3-2-1 backup plan, right? Where you have a number of backups available to you that are immutable, that you know are going to be good images, that aren't going to be corrupted by malware or something like that, so that you can scan them before you try to implement your backup system, because then who knows if your backups, if they weren't disconnected from your network, weren't compromised. So we've helped a lot of insureds kind of understand the reasons for good backups, because that helps them to protect them from the ransomware that we've seen and we had to pay the claims out on for systems that get locked out. But now what we've seen, because the backups have been improved and that they're using good cadence on backups, recovery strategies, and testing them, now these ransomware gangs are infiltrating systems and just taking the data and extorting them. Like, hey, look, this is the data that I got. I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to publish it unless you pay me this extortion. And then who's to say if they aren't even actually going to live up to their end of the bargain and be like, okay, well, yeah, you're going to do this. Or who's to say another gang doesn't come along and is like, oh, hey, they had success here. Let's go ahead and help hit them up. So when you see those things happen, now you got to go back and have the discussions about, okay, what are you guys doing to really look for suspicious activity? How is your SIMs, your SOARs, how are these things in place? And so we help them, after you have these events, understand the reasons for these other pieces of the pie, so to speak, to help them have better posturing and security. Because at the end of the day, it makes them more secure, it helps them protect their customers and their employees, and it also makes them a better risk to take on, which may result in a rate decrease or something like that. You never know. So just showing that they have that security posturing and that they're thinking like that helps them to really recover from those situations that we've seen.
So Nathan, when you guys do have claims, do you typically, especially on the, I would say like the larger clients, right? Not the smaller ones. Do you work with them on a roadmap of remediation action?
That would be a slippery slope, I would say, because then if we're telling them what to do, insurance should never dictate your security posturing. We should look and see what your posturing is and assess it that way. But I mean, if you ask for a protocol or something, or a specific brand of something, I would never offer that up, because then you're like, well, Nathan said I could get insurance if I implemented X, Y, or Z. But insurance should never dictate what your organization does. That always needs to come from inside, because if it comes from outside, the effectiveness is not going to be there. The buy-in is not going to be there. It's just going to be something that they have to do instead of something that they want to do, which is the disconnect. So I think that our claims people, we have ties with different companies that provide different sort of solutions. In fact, just speaking of our policies, if you are a primary policyholder, there's a lot of different organizations that you can go to that are on our panel that you can get services from just by being our insured. A lot of companies have that. So again, you mentioned earlier, just taking an insurance, you have it, you don't know what it does, you don't even know who has it right now. Like your CISO, he may not know what the insurance covers or what the benefits that actually come with the policy are. So you think about some of the benefits that come with that policy is like you can have consultation services to help them assess your security posturing from an actual outside firm. But we ourselves, or cyber insurance people, we should not be establishing roadmaps, in my opinion. I think we should be looking at them and hoping that an insured is thinking about the future and how they can continue to improve, because we all know that with everything coming down the pike from the bad actors, they're not letting up. They're going to use AI. They're going to use all these other things to really strengthen their attacks. And we can't, on the defensive side, rest out on the laurels of like, oh, hey, we implemented MFA, but now what's happening, right? Now you are having MFA fatigue, and now you're having these MFAs being overcome by persistence. Just making sure like they are thinking about the threats that they have specifically see in their field and how they can protect themselves from those. It varies. And again, I don't think it shouldn't come as a dictation from me.
Yeah.
Given where the cost is going in terms of the average cost of incidents going up, given where there's more cost in terms of incident that keeps going up as well, I'm curious to get your take on where do you see cyber insurance going in the future? Do you see it like the way insurance providers look at Florida, for example, for insuring homes, right? Where they're just uninsurable? Where do you see it going 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Just out of curiosity, if trends continue progressing like the way they are.
So I definitely think, looking at how things have progressed, cyber is continually being a maturing line of insurance, right? So looking at the future, the threats are always going to be there. They're always going to, any company that's online has a threat, right? So it's trying to insure a home in Florida. I mean, I get the analogy, but if you have a company that is not tied into any sort of threat intel, or that is not really aware of what's happening in the landscape, that's not keeping up with people, that doesn't have the appropriate staff to really support their systems on the inside. I mean, that's kind of more of what you look at. That's the uninsurable factor. It's like, hey, if you're like a, say, $200 million company, you have one security guy, and it's all managed in-house. You're asking for a disaster there, because that guy's got to sleep sometime, right? And if you have a call tree set up that goes maybe to somebody else's as backup, it's going to be difficult. So I think it's more of the quality of the organization and the internals that really affect that. And I think as we continue to progress on, as we have, going from like the basic, do you have a computer, yes or no, to now looking at EDR, having those discussions, talking about backups, having those discussions, talking about employee training, which I think is the fundamental piece of any sort of cybersecurity program, making sure that that's quality, that it's not just a checkbox for them. Those are all the things that affect the insurability factor, and will continue to as cyber insurance grows and gets more nuanced and understanding what these threats are going to be. Because, I mean, it was Move It yesterday, and it was Log4j before that, and it was it's the soup of the day, right? But really understanding how are you responding to these types of events, and really diving into the playbooks involved and understanding that they have them, and they have hard copies, so that if their internet goes down, they can still refer to how they can do it. So understanding how they are maturing or being a matured organization is going to continue to kind of tick up on the underwriting side, because we're getting smarter, we're learning, right? As everything happens, we're all in this, we're seeing what happens, we're seeing the results, and we're going to ask more questions related to, okay, so in the event that, what was that called? It was Intel, the Intel processors back in like 2019, where a lot of people were having to replace those. So in the event that you have to replace all of your work systems, they're all basically bricked. How are you going to affect that coverage, or enact that coverage rather?
Well, Nathan, this was really educational and really helpful. I think we've got a little bit of a demystification of cyber insurance, as you had mentioned earlier when we were chatting. I think you've done a great job of that. And I'm excited to see that there's folks like you out there that really care and that actually know your stuff and can get intimately involved in working with the various stakeholders in a company to ensure that you're more of an ally for them, right? That you're on their side to try to help them to get the right coverage, but also at the same time you're educating, you're giving them some best practices as well. And I think that all of us working together to continue to educate, to continue to evangelize the best practices is what's going to make us more of a secure world, right, overall. So thank you so much for joining. Any last thoughts that you'd like to leave here before we go?
Thank you for having me on. It was a blast chatting with you on this one. For those that are filling out those cyber insurance applications, I know it's tedious. It can be a lot of questions, but hey, we ask because we care.
Love it. All right. Well, Nathan, thanks again. Ramin, always a fun chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Securing the Future podcast with your hosts, Jesse Metters and Ramin Lamay. If you enjoyed, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a rating.